Jeff, we're so excited to have you on today. It's funny, right before we hopped on, I asked you a question because I said I was going to call you a master of the arts. And I think what you were going to respond in saying is kind of what you said earlier is you're never really a master. You're always learning. And I think that's what I appreciate about you, because you've been doing these meditative arts, Tai Chi and Qigong for 30 plus years, leading your academy for 30 plus years. And we're so excited to dive into your expertise a little bit.
Nice. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, I want to understand, so how did you get into the world of martial arts? What kind of led you down? Because I know, and traditionally when people think martial arts, at least for me, and what is quite popular, I feel like, is jiu-jitsu. And and I know that's something that you do and you practice as well, but you go beyond that and you're teaching, as Dom said, Tai Chi and Qigong. So how did you end up going into those practices as well when you started with martial arts?
Yeah, so I started doing martial arts at a fairly young age in my teens, and it was something I was always intrigued by. However, I grew up with fairly modest means, so I didn't really have a family that could support that desire. And so once I was old enough to get a job, I got lessons at a local martial arts academy. And it wasn't until my later teens and early 20s when I was really into Western boxing where I met a boxing coach who, after following him around for a while, he told me one day, he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. And, at the time I was this young kid who didn't know much of anything, thinking, isn't Tai Chi for old people in the park? How's that going to help me be a better fighter? And I started doing the practice, and it changed my life in so many ways. And through the years, I've seen thousands of students come through the academy, and I've heard hundreds of stories of how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives. And so that's kind of what's made me so passionate about getting the message out there and writing my last couple books and creating the online program and the teacher training program that I have.
So that's very interesting to me, because I think that's the stereotype a lot of people might think of. Oh, Tai Chi, that's something that old people do in the park, or when you see it, it's a very slow practice. So how does something like that translate into making you a better boxer or a better explosive athlete?
So many ways, and if you look today, there's many examples over and over again of how athletes, professional athletes in all sports, football, basketball, baseball, are turning to the meditative arts to improve their performance. When Phil Jackson was coaching the Chicago Bulls, when they won all their games, when Michael Jordan was on their team, he was having them practice meditation and Tai Chi and yoga to help improve their performance on the court. And so, it's becoming very much more open, and people are coming more kind of in tune to the idea of the meditative arts. But it works not only with your physiology, but with your mental state and your emotional state, giving you more control so you can be a better performer in pretty much anything you do.
So what is the premise around it? What is the purpose of someone kind of going in and saying, this might be good for me. Maybe I should start this. Why would someone kind of, go into these practices?
That's a great question, because that's something I always try to get people to come to a realization of when they're starting to take on the practice. Because the most important thing to having a successful meditation practice is that you do a little bit every day. And if you don't have a strong why as to why you want to do it, the alarm's going to go off and you're going to hit the snooze button. You're not going to want to get up and practice. And, it's having that consistency. All of the meditative arts, whether you're doing a sitting practice, you're doing Tai Chi, Qigong, Bagua, Xingyi, Chuan, whatever form of meditation you're doing, it's meant to help you to experience a deeper feeling within the body and a deeper mental connection to that. And the only way you're going to ever experience that is by consistency and repetition. The Dalai Lama once said that everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, then you should meditate for an hour. And I love that saying, in that, everybody should spend time and just reconnect with who we are, because it's so common that in today's society, that, we're out in, the busy to-dos and everything we have going on, and we've got people coming from all angles, where oftentimes we're kind of forced to wear a mask and hide how we really feel and maybe not show our true emotions, and maybe we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or we don't want to tell them what we see. And in doing this, we're so used to wearing these masks that eventually we go to start looking at ourselves in the mirror and we're still wearing that mask. Meditation is one of those things that helps us stay connected to who we really are and improves your performance in athletics, in your own interpersonal communication, and your relationships with other people. There's just so many different applications and how you can use the practice.
And I feel like meditation is another thing that people struggle with at face value sometimes, because it's like, how do I do it? What am I supposed to do? I just sit cross-legged in a room for 10 minutes and then what? And so can you explain a little bit more about what a successful practice, a meditation practice, should look like or feel like? And I know that you also talk a little bit about different types of meditation, some of which you probably just named.
Yes. So with the meditative arts, it doesn't matter really what discipline you're practicing. What's important is to understand and know why you're getting into the practice. So I break down the meditative arts into 5 categories. We have more of our performance-based category, which is athletics or the combative sports. There's the therapeutic side of the training, the medical side of the training, the philosophical side of the training, and then also the meditative or spiritual side of the training. And for whatever reason you're taking on the practice, you're going to incorporate different practices to help you achieve that goal. And if you don't understand why you're coming to the practice from the beginning, you might be going down a wrong path. And that's one of the things that I see happening so often with people, is that there's pluses and minuses to everything, but YouTube is a great resource, but there's a zillion videos up there. And it's overwhelming for somebody that doesn't have any guidance. You're looking at this and that and the other, and it's so easy to get confused. So if you're thinking about taking on a meditative practice, one of the first things I would recommend is to find somebody that can guide you down that path, and it'll save you a lot of time. It's easy to waste 10 years of going down these wrong paths before you find the next one. And I've seen that happen all too often with what I'm doing. And so take a little bit of time, figure out what your why is, and find somebody to help you figure out the best approach to doing that. And it's the same as anything else. I mean, you're not going to become a professional basketball player without having good coaches along the way to help guide you and find the best path there. And it's really the same thing with the meditative arts. So once you have that figured out and you know what direction you want to go and you have a guide to help you, then it's breaking it down into the different modalities of practice. And I kind of break them down into 3 categories. We have our ritual practices. Ritual practice is the first one, where you want to set time aside every day. And it could be as little as 20 minutes. It doesn't need to be where you go retire to a cave and meditate for the rest of your life. But if you just do a little bit every day, kind of like you're brushing your teeth, that consistency, you're really going to see the benefits start to come out with that. Then there's active practices. And active practices are things that you can do when you're standing in line at the grocery store or sitting in your car at a red light. And they can be as simple as maybe counting out 10 breaths or doing some spinal rotations or a simple movement practice. And it's a way that you can stay in tune throughout the day and try to stay connected to your center. And then lastly, there's the philosophical side of the practice. And these could be either used as active practices or ritual-based practices. And so as you understand this and you start building an evolving life practice around meditation, we're pulling things from these 3 different categories and taking things from movement practices, from sitting practices, standing practices, breath work, and starting to build a practice around your lifestyle to help you go down the path that you're looking to go down.
So meditation in your words, doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're sitting down and meditating. It could be movement-based meditation. And is that what you kind of teach within your martial arts and your movement practices? Is it meditative as you're kind of moving through these, or should it be separate? Should you have a time when you're just sitting and meditating versus moving and meditating?
So yes, there are movement arts that are based on the meditation, like Tai Chi or Qigong.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also a lot of different sitting practices. And even in sitting meditation, there's hundreds of different breathing strategies. There's different energetic circulations that you do. And so even if that was all you were doing was a sitting practice, you could spend the rest of your life studying how to be a better sitting practitioner of meditation. Now, what I like to do is a combination of many different modalities, because people come to the practice from different points of view, different places in their life, different energies. And some people, it's very difficult for them to sit down for 20 minutes. And for somebody like that, I would start them off maybe with a Qigong set or some Tai Chi and something to try to get them used to being in that meditative mindset and starting to build the consistency and see the success of the practice. And then once they have that, then we can start maybe adding some sitting practices or maybe some standing meditation practices or different breathwork exercises. And then we start to have more of an evolving practice that's not going to be the same today as it will be in 5 years or 10 years.
One thing that I like about, and I definitely am not somebody who has a daily practice. In the past, I've had periods where I've tapped into more of a daily ritual type practice and have seen profound impacts. And the thing that I loved the most about it was how it seemed to help me during stressful times during the day. So can you speak a little bit to why doing a daily ritual practice might help you? Our days full of constant micro, macro, and massive stresses. How does having a ritual-based meditation practice help us with the stresses that we might encounter in everyday life?
So that's a very deep question, and there's lots of ways. I'm going to explain kind of the most common one that I hear people tell me all the time, and it's also a reason why a lot of people turn away from meditation, in that they think when they do the practice that they need to be able to quiet their mind. And there's somehow along the way, the general population has got this misconception that to do meditation, you need to be reaching this state of nirvana. And that's so not the case. You know, I've been studying for a long time. I've met meditation practitioners from all over the world and been very fortunate to train with some really great practitioners. And I've never once met anybody that doesn't get distracted and doesn't have their mind wander. And that's part of the practice. And the idea when you meditate is you learn how to, say, for example, you sit for 20 minutes or you do a standing meditation for 20 minutes. Your mind might get distracted 50 times during that 20 minutes. But every time it gets distracted, you use your breath, you use your posture, you use the movement, if it's a movement practice, to help bring you back to focus and back to center. And every time you do that, it's a repetition of learning how to get out of that distraction and come back to focus. And if you do that 50 times a day in your ritual practice, and you do that every day for the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, think about the muscle that you're building up to be able to deal with these distractions and conflicts and then come back to that central equilibrium. Now, when you're going through the day and something stressful comes into your life, somebody says something negative to you or whatever, that you get overwhelmed at work, it's easy to go down that negative path and lead to the next negative thing and the next problem and the next thing. Whereas if we could learn to recognize that disturbance as soon as it happens and use our practice to bring us back to center, we can stop from going down these negative paths and keeping more of a level head and dealing with these different stressors that come up in our life over and over again. And that's one of the ways that it can benefit you with stress and anxiety and depression. And that's why so many people all over the world are turning to the meditative arts to help deal with these problems.
I mean, I think that's so incredibly important to point out, and hopefully people start to, take a little bit more attention to, okay, how can I create more of a ritualistic practice? I mean, that's something I've even started to work on, even if it's not 20 minutes, if I just first thing in the morning, open up my blinds, get some sunlight and sit down and take a few breaths. Like, how can I do that before I get down and see my son and go into, the craze of the day? So how can I start just a little bit at a time, and maybe hopefully it will grow right to something a little bit longer, but just starting little bits at a time to build and create more of that ritualistic practice to be able to handle life the way that you're talking about it, and redirecting your brain and the interruptions that happen throughout the day, I think is so huge. And when it comes more to the movement-based meditative practices, and the arts that you teach, why would someone, how does that physiologically kind of help them? One thing that I can think of, top of mind, I haven't done it myself, but just thinking of the slow, controlled movements and how much awareness that's building within the body. Why are these practices good, not just mentally and meditatively, but physiologically for the body? What benefit have you seen from students?
I'm going to lead that into the idea of yielding, because I think that could answer the question from a couple different directions. And
great.
Yielding to me is one of the coolest concepts in the meditative arts and the martial arts, and it's been used for generations. My newest book, The Yielding Warrior, is all based on this idea, and it talks about how to integrate the three different kinds of yielding: physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force, and now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you. And it's obvious how this is helpful in a combat situation or in an athletic encounter where you're coming up against somebody who maybe has 50 pounds on you. It's going to be very difficult to wrestle that person to the ground. Whereas if you could yield to their force, a lot of times you can get ahead of them and come out on top in that conflict. Now, in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. First, you need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed, the breath has to be calm, and the mind has to be present. Now, while this takes years and years to get to a high level of this, from day one, you start seeing the benefits of being more aware of what's going on inside yourself, which also helps you be more aware of what's going on in other people. And this is where we move into what I call mental yielding. Say, for example, I say something that unsettles you, and I pick up on it right from the beginning. It's a lot easier to adjust the conversation and keep us in a happy place than if I'm not paying attention to that, and pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. Learning how to use yielding in all of your interactions is extremely powerful. One, you're just being more considerate, but two, it gives you the ability to see things from the beginning so you can guide conversations and guide interactions in a positive direction towards the outcome you want to see. And this makes it good for both people rather than just kind of forcing your way on somebody and making it happen the way you want it. And so mental yielding can be used in, relationships and business and negotiation and sales. I mean, there's so many different applications of this. If you ever read any old military strategy, you'll see that a lot of old successful military people use the concept of yielding in battles. And so it's just across the board on the applications with it. This is very much like emotional yielding, which is the third one, except for it's with your own interpersonal conflicts. Oftentimes, things will happen to us and we'll respond, and we'll go down this path, and we might get an hour a day, a week down that road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding, if we had that expanded awareness and we were in tune as soon as it happened, and we could sit back and maybe evaluate the scenario a little bit better and maybe make a different choice, a lot of times it can save us a lot of heartache on the other side. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding for years. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, that makes a lot of sense. I do yielding all the time. And while I would agree, I think everybody does yielding to some degree all the time. It's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, he would see things about that crime scene and the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And that's kind of what the meditative arts helps us do with our own internal awareness, and then also the awareness that we see in other people. And I feel like you're never going to reach that level of awareness without a meditative practice.
It reminds me of, I hear people talk about a tactical pause a lot, or, using that tactical pause to then not go with your initial reaction, or the gut reaction that wants to come blurting out of us, but do it a little more thoughtfully and in a way that is going to, whether it's a conversation with somebody, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, it's going to help you respond with a little more tact. And I really like that. I think about many applications in which I could do a better job at that in my own life. On this podcast, a lot of people come here because they're in pain to some degree, whether that be, a physical injury they had, whether it's a chronic or persistent pain condition. So where does a meditative art or a meditative movement art like Tai Chi or Qigong come into helping somebody address pains in their body?
So when I mentioned earlier the 5 different directions of the practice, we have the martial or athletic side, the therapeutic side, the medical side, philosophical side, and the meditative side. Back in the old days, all of the old Chinese doctors were Qigong practitioners because they learned how to build up their energy and use that for healing other people. That's one way. So by doing this practice, we can increase our energy levels, and there's different breathing strategies. Sometimes we can do, like, say you have a sore elbow or you have an ailment going on in the body. You could do different breathing strategies to help improve the circulation there to aid in the healing. The other thing is, by developing a deeper level of awareness, one of the things that often holds us back from rehabbing through injury is that we keep injuring it over and over again because we're not really in tune with our body. We don't know what our limitations are. By being more sensitive and more aware of what's going on and being able to pay attention to, for example, say what your range of motion is to stay out of that pain-free area, now we start being more in tune through our day-to-day activities, and it lets that injury heal a lot quicker because of that increased awareness. Now, if you were to follow the medical side of Qigong, you could study that for the rest of your life. And, they go into acupuncture, acupressure, they do herbs, they do tuina, they do all these different things that are all part of Qigong. Qigong is often referred to as the science of the breath, and there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies, and we'll do these for different mental, physical states, but we'll also do these for different energetic circulations in the body that we can use towards healing and that kind of thing.
I mean, just the fact of awareness, what you brought up, like having that awareness in the body. I think so often we're told, you during work, or you're just running through everyday life, and then you get your workout in and you're just trying to get it done and move on. And so often we're trying to get things done that we're moving so quickly, we lose that awareness and that key point into our body. And so that's where I can see it being so beneficial, especially for chronic pain patients, to slow down, to use their breath with movement, to gain that awareness through control and through that range of motion and understanding your body in a way that you probably haven't done or used in that way before. So I could see it just being so beneficial. And one thing that I wanted to go to as well is that you talk about 5 regulations that you refer to that could lead to a healthier lifestyle. What are these 5 regulations, and what does that mean when you're leading down toward a healthier lifestyle?
So the 5 regulations is used in any meditative practice. It doesn't matter what style of meditation you're doing, a still or a movement meditation. And they are regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. Briefly, I'll go through and kind of describe what all 5 of those are to kind of give you an idea. So regulating the body, an example of that would be, think about you're sitting down at your computer for 4 hours and your shoulders are hunched forward and you start feeling lethargic and tired, you get a stiff neck. Just this idea of having poor posture is affecting your energetic state. Now, the flip side of that, think about somebody walking into the room who is your most admired or respected person on the planet, how your body's going to perk up, and think about how your energetic state changes from that one thing. Well, we're in control of that all day, every day, but most people walk around with poor posture. They have their shoulders hunched forward, their neck sore all the time, and a lot of that is just because of how they hold themselves. And so regulating the body is the easiest of these 5 to accomplish, and usually most people with 2 to 3 months of consistent effort can learn how to regulate the body and have it close to their potential. And so this is why it's the first step in this procedure. And then next we have regulating the breath. Regulating the breath is a very deep topic and can be a lifetime journey. However, there's a lot of things with the breath that will benefit from day one. And I mentioned earlier that Qigong is often referred to as the science of the breath. And, because there's so many different breathing strategies, we kind of broadly categorize them into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of meditation practices. And an example of a yin breath would be, if you ever listen to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And that's the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. So if we want to emulate that style of breath, we could do longer inhales, maybe soft retentions at the end of the inhale to get more of that deeper state of meditation in our practice. This is very good for stress reduction. This is good for anxiety. And then on the flip side of that, we have the yang side of the breath. And an example of this would be if you ever had to push your car or you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is use the exhale side of the breath, maybe put tension in the breath, maybe make it audible. And this helps generate energy and power. And you'll see this over and over again with athletes or warriors. They'll use this to get psyched up and get that energy flowing. It's also good for creativity if you're an artist and you're looking to be inspired by something. So once we learn to regulate the breath, then we can use that to find more balance in our day-to-day lives. So for example, everybody, and it doesn't matter who we are, we all go through emotional ups and downs throughout the day. But when we see ourselves start to get excited, we can use the breath to bring it back down. And when we see ourselves start to get a little bit depleted, we can use the breath to bring it back up. And this is a way how we can find more balance and be more stable throughout the day rather than being like on a roller coaster like some people are. And this is very good for conserving our energy and keeping a more solid focus and closer to that center state. Then we have regulating the mind. Regulating the mind is, again, a lifetime practice. However, it's something that we work on day to day, every day. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, learning how to get away from these distractions. The idea of this is rather than get caught up in these mental distractions that take us one way or the other, by having the power to keep focused, we can stay in tune. There's this story of these two old monks that are walking down the dirt road right after a rainstorm. And they come up to this beautiful lady, and she's standing on the other side of a big mud puddle, and she's crying. And the older monk says, "Ma'am, is everything okay? Can I help you?" And she says, "Yes, I need to be somewhere, and I can't get across this puddle without getting my dress all dirty." So the older monk, he rolls up his pant legs, and he walks across the puddle, and he picks her up, puts her on his back, and takes her to the other side, and she's off on her way. Well, they get 2 miles down the road or so, and the younger monk, he's just furious, and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch women, and yet you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down at him, and he says, "You're still thinking about that lady? I left her back there at the puddle." And, we do this all the time in our lives. We'll have something happen to us, and we'll stew on it, and we'll think about it. And sometimes a minute, an hour, a week go by, and we're still frustrated with this problem. Well, we need to just learn how to let it go. And it's one of those things, like I said, it's a lifetime practice. But by just understanding that we do this, you start to see and recognize these things that are happening in your day-to-day life from the beginning, which is very helpful, because that first stage is just that recognition that we're doing that. Then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And if we have come to the point where we can regulate the body, regulate the breath, and regulate the mind, regulating the energy is easy. It's different circulations within the body. It's our different energetic expressions, which are very easy to control with the prior three. Lastly, there's regulating the spirit. And regulating the spirit is a very deep idea. And, most high-level Qigong masters or monks who live the life of meditation, and that's all they do, their ultimate goal is to reach enlightenment. Now, I've been studying the meditative arts for 36 years. I've traveled around the world many times studying with different teachers, and I've never once met anybody who I would say is enlightened. However, by working towards this goal, there's a lot of, I guess, if you will, for lack of better terminology, there's enlightened moments that you'll have. And so we're working towards this stage. And even though we may never get there, and in today's society, I kind of feel like that's a very difficult feat to accomplish, but that path is where we're directing our energy.
I mean, I think there's so much just within those 5 regulations that it gets me spinning and thinking more about ways that I could incorporate this into my own life in ways that I think would be very beneficial. And again, we haven't had anybody on the podcast who's talked in this depth, especially about meditative or martial arts. Clearly, you've been doing it for a long time yourself. And I think my favorite thing is that you continue to say yourself that you're a student and constantly learning. And I think that's one of the greatest thing about these practices is that they are lifelong practices. And no matter how much we work on them, there's always different things that we can continue to learn and different ways we can continue to incorporate these, become more aware in all these different aspects of life. And I know that you have a lot more information out there. Where could people go to learn more about you? You mentioned your book already, which is The Yielding Warrior, but where could people go to learn more about you and how to learn from you or take courses?
So right now I'm running a special on the website where you can get a free copy of the book. If you just go to theyieldingwarrior.com/book, you just pay for shipping and handling, and we'll ship you out a free copy of that. Also on that same website, you can get information about our online program for individuals, learning how to build a life practice around the meditative arts, as well as our teacher training program. So if you were somebody who was a life coach or owned a yoga studio or a martial arts academy and you wanted to add a program like this to an already existing business or create that for a program that you've established, there's that avenue as well. And if by chance you're in Portland, Oregon, you're always welcome to come into the academy also.
Amazing. Well, if we're ever in Portland, Oregon, I think we're going to have to slide in and try some classes. I think that sounds amazing.
Absolutely. Jeff, we appreciate you being here. We'll have all the information in the show notes and the description to this episode. And yeah, hope we get to come and practice with you someday.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.